In the rural hills of Kentucky, in the year 1867, the case of Timothy Caldwell stunned both townsfolk and the broader medical community. At just 12 years old, Timothy became the subject of whispers, newspaper articles, and heated debate when reports emerged that he had survived without consuming any food or water for a period of 40 days. In an era where medical knowledge was still developing, the very idea of a child surviving in such a state defied all known biological norms. What made Timothy's case even more perplexing was that multiple witnesses, including a local physician, Reverend John Silas, and the boy's schoolteacher, claimed to have observed him closely during this time, confirming that he neither ate nor drank. The boy lay motionless in a wooden bed, his breathing faint but steady, his eyes occasionally fluttering open before closing once more into what was described as a semi-trance state. Initial assumptions leaned toward hysteria, or perhaps a clever hoax orchestrated by his family. But the Caldwell family was known in the town of Grayson County for their quiet, reserved nature. They had no history of theatrics or spectacle seeking, and the idea that they would endanger their only son for attention seemed out of character to those who knew them. Timothy's father, Elias Caldwell, a blacksmith, reportedly wept before local elders, pleading for someone to explain what was happening to his boy. As days turned into weeks, local physicians began visiting the Caldwell home, attempting to determine the cause of Timothy's condition. Leeching, bleeding, and the administration of salts yielded no response. An attending doctor from Lexington even tried to provoke a reaction by pricking Timothy's skin with a hot needle. But the boy neither stirred nor flinched. The town's interest quickly turned to fear as religious leaders began to argue over the cause of his unnatural survival. Reverend Silas believed Timothy's state to be a divine sign, suggesting that the boy was undergoing a biblical form of fasting or transformation. A traveling preacher from Ohio, however, warned the town that Timothy might be possessed by unclean spirits and recommended an exorcism. Tensions escalated when onlookers from nearby counties arrived to witness the so-called miracle boy. And soon, Timothy's room became something between a shrine and a medical ward. His mother, Judith, sat constantly at his side, brushing his hair and murmuring prayers as physicians and clergymen alternated in their attempts to explain the inexplicable. Despite the intense scrutiny, Timothy's body showed none of the signs typically associated with extreme fasting or dehydration. His skin remained pale but elastic, his lips not cracked, and his pulse when detected was slow but steady. This observation baffled the few educated doctors who visited from larger cities. They noted that under normal circumstances, the human body would begin shutting down its vital functions after just a few days without water. By the end of the first week, his kidneys should have failed. After 2 weeks, coma or death was almost certain. But in Timothy's case, he lingered between life and death, never regaining full consciousness, yet never slipping fully away. One journal entry by Dr. Marion Fielding noted that the boy's physical state was in contradiction to all established knowledge of human biology and metabolism. By the 25th day, rumors spread that Timothy had begun to whisper during the night. Witnesses claimed he murmured in an unknown tongue, sometimes repeating the same phrases over and over. A Latin scholar from Louisville was summoned to translate the words, but he declared the speech to be neither Latin, Greek, nor Hebrew. One old woman who had once lived among the Choctaw tribes believed she recognized some of the syllables as resembling pre-Columbian native chants. These reports only deepened the mystery. Others dismissed the utterances as nonsense syllables produced by a damaged or unconscious brain. But for the believers, each word held prophetic weight. Throughout the ordeal, skeptics remained. Some accused the Caldwells of feeding their son in secret, though no mechanism for doing so was ever discovered. A group of 3 local men once attempted to sneak into the boy's room at night to catch the family in the act, but were reportedly driven off by an unexplainable burst of cold air and the sudden extinguishing of their lanterns. The incident added fuel to growing superstitions surrounding the Caldwell household. Several neighbors moved away temporarily, claiming the land was cursed. Livestock belonging to nearby farms began to die without cause, and a lightning bolt struck the Caldwell barn on the 31st night of Timothy's trance. Whether coincidence or omen, such events contributed to a sense of unease and growing hysteria. Newspapers from as far away as New York published brief columns on the fasting boy of Kentucky, and even the Smithsonian received letters urging them to investigate. A few physicians proposed that the boy might be in a state of self-induced catalepsy or suspended animation, a fringe theory, even by 19th century standards. One Philadelphia doctor proposed an underground spring beneath the house might be releasing rare minerals into the air, altering the metabolic function of Timothy's body. Another hypothesized that Timothy had unknowingly trained his body through a form of yogic fasting, similar to Indian mystics. But none of these theories were ever substantiated by evidence, and no formal medical journal ever published a paper on his case. As the 40th day approached, many in the town feared the boy would die. A vigil was held, and over 70 people gathered outside the house in prayer. At sunset, on the 40th day, Judith Caldwell reportedly screamed, prompting neighbors to rush inside. They found Timothy sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open, his lips forming a single word: water. He drank a full cup slowly before falling asleep again. After that night, Timothy never returned to his former self. He grew quiet and withdrawn, rarely speaking and unable to recall the events of the past 40 days, but even in this state, he retained a strange aura that unsettled many who visited. Some claimed that animals reacted oddly in his presence. Others noted that clocks often stopped ticking when he walked into a room. Caldwell's became increasingly reclusive, refusing all further medical inquiries or journalistic attention. As Timothy Caldwell's strange condition continued to bewilder physicians and spiritual leaders, new dimensions of his mystery began to emerge that surpassed the physical. It began subtly, with a few reports from those closest to the boy. On the 15th night of his unexplained state, his mother Judith reportedly heard Timothy whispering in his sleep, expecting the usual incoherent murmurs common in fevers. She instead claimed that the boy spoke words she could not understand. These whispers were rhythmic, repeated, and often uttered with perfect enunciation. The next night, a neighbor, Miss Althea Perkins, who had come to help Judith with chores, also heard the boy speak. According to her, he spoke in what she described as something that sounded like a church tongue, but wasn't. Soon others came to witness it. Over the next week, townsfolk gathered outside the Caldwell home, peering through windows or gathering in silence in the dark to listen. The boy would whisper only at night, around the hour of 3, and his words appeared too very nightly. Someone suggested that it might be Latin, and Reverend Silas attempted to transcribe one of the phrases. When he read it aloud to a fellow clergyman who had studied in Europe, the man responded with disbelief. While parts of it bore resemblance to Latin, others matched no known classical language. In desperation, Reverend Silas sent the transcription to a university in Virginia. The reply weeks later indicated that some of the words might be a corrupted form of ancient Greek, but the sentence structure followed no known grammar. Curiosity turned into fear when the words began to align with real-world events. On one evening, Timothy reportedly whispered the name Miriam Clay, followed by the phrase, soot in the throat. The next morning, news reached Grayson County that Miriam Clay, a widow living 2 counties over, had died in her sleep from smoke inhalation caused by a chimney blockage. There was no known connection between the boy and the deceased. The pattern repeated itself days later. Timothy whispered Turner gone and Millstone weeps. 3 days afterward, Charles Turner, a miller known in the region, was found dead beneath a collapsed millstone in his workshop. These occurrences escalated the attention around Timothy's condition, while some argued the boy was channeling some divine or spiritual knowledge. Others began to fear darker forces at work. Not all the events he muttered came true, but enough did to raise concern among even the most skeptical observers. A traveling physician named Dr. Alban Ridgway would initially dismiss the case as a form of somnambulism, returned to Grayson County after hearing of the predictions. He attempted to document the boy's nightly utterances with a phonograph device, but the machine reportedly malfunctioned each time it was brought into the Caldwell home. Another doctor from Cincinnati attempted to record them by hand but claimed that Timothy would fall into silence the moment he entered the room. Strangely, when the doctor left the premises and stood outside, Timothy resumed whispering. The boy appeared somehow aware of observers even while unconscious, and seemed to control when he allowed others to hear him. The boy's predictions weren't always of death. Sometimes they hinted at weather patterns or strange visions. "Week," he murmured. "Sky rips in 3 repeatedly." That same week, a powerful thunderstorm struck the area, splitting 3 massive trees on the Caldwell property. On another occasion, he repeated the words, "5 stars fall," and within days, a meteor shower occurred over southern Kentucky, surprising even amateur astronomers. These incidents added to the perception that Timothy had tapped into some unknown layer of awareness. Some whispered that the boy had become a vessel and unwilling prophet who saw beyond the visible world. Yet for all the fascination, fear was never far behind. The whispers took a darker turn in mid-September when Timothy began speaking full names of townsfolk. He would speak slowly, clearly, and with unusual pronunciation, sometimes elongating syllables in ways that unsettled listeners. One of the names he uttered was Ruth Elbridge, a spinster who lived alone near the river. Days later, her home caught fire under mysterious circumstances. Another name, Lester Vaughn, was heard on the same night that the man suffered a violent seizure and died, despite having no prior history of illness. By this point, some townspeople pleaded with the Caldwells to take the boy to a monastery or remove him from town. The family refused, arguing that Timothy was not responsible for the events. The rumors surrounding his abilities eventually attracted attention from outside the state. A small team of linguists, mystics, and even a few skeptics arrived from as far as Chicago and Boston to study him. They were met with resistance, both from the family and the townsfolk, many of whom had begun to treat Timothy as something between a living omen and a cursed child. A noted spiritualist named Madame Goudreau attempted to hold a séance in the boy's room, claiming that she could draw out the forces inhabiting him. But after 15 minutes, she fled the room, her face pale, stating only that the boy is not alone. She refused to elaborate and returned to New Orleans the next day. Declining all interviews, Timothy's behavior while awake also grew increasingly strange. He often stared into corners as if watching something invisible. He refused to speak during the day and only communicated when he did, through gestures or single words. A physician attempted to test his mental faculties by placing unfamiliar books in his room, some written in French, others in German or Greek. To their astonishment, Timothy began to flip through the books and trace his fingers under the lines, as though reading them. He showed particular attention to texts dealing with ancient astronomy and metaphysics, though his comprehension could never be fully tested. He refused to discuss what he saw in the pages. Timothy's ability to foresee events continued sporadically. Throughout that fall, though as winter approached, his episodes became less frequent. He appeared to grow physically weaker, though still far stronger than any child should be after months of inconsistent nourishment. His eyes remained glassy, unfocused, yet they would occasionally snap to attention when someone entered the room, giving the impression that he saw something beyond what others could perceive. When asked simple questions, Timothy would often look past the person, as though answering someone behind them. His most devoted observers believed he was in contact with another realm, perhaps the future, perhaps the dead, perhaps something no one could fully comprehend. The final strangeness reported by multiple witnesses was Timothy's reaction to church bells. Every Sunday, when the local chapel bell rang, the boy would convulse slightly, his lips tightening and his fists clenching. Once, after the bell had tolled during a funeral service, Timothy rose suddenly and walked out of his room without help. Standing barefoot on the frost-covered ground outside, he gazed at the church in the distance before collapsing to the earth. After being carried back inside, he remained unresponsive for days. Some believed the bell's sound triggered something inside him, either pain or awareness. Speculated that Timothy was caught between divine and demonic realms, and that sacred sounds pierced the veil he was trapped within. Following the mysterious period of fasting and the eerie prophecies whispered during the night, the enigma of Timothy Caldwell deepened even further when, after months of escalating attention, he suddenly disappeared from both the public eye and historical record. His final days in Grayson County were marked not by recovery, but by a gradual withdrawal, both socially and physically. The once crowded Caldwell home, which had hosted curious neighbors, skeptical doctors, hopeful clergy, and ambitious journalists, began to empty. Reports from late December 1867 noted that Timothy no longer engaged in any form of communication, verbal, gestural, or written. He would sit for hours staring at walls, ignoring stimuli, eating only what was placed in front of him, and barely reacting to the presence of others. Despite his return to basic human function, it was as though his mind had been stripped of earthly ties. One schoolteacher who had known Timothy before his affliction remarked how unrecognizable he had become. Gone was the bright, inquisitive boy who had once asked endless questions about the stars and built contraptions from spare wood and nails. Behind his father's shop, what now remained was a hollowed figure whose eyes seemed to be perpetually fixed on something distant and dreadful. When asked about his experiences, he gave no response, not even a nod. Some believed he had simply lost all higher function, while others whispered that he had seen something he could never unsee as the harsh Kentucky winter set in. The Caldwell family posted a sign on their door requesting privacy and began to decline all visits. The townsfolk, once obsessed with the boy's daily condition, moved on, partially out of discomfort, partially because the novelty had faded. A few locals claimed to still hear strange sounds emanating from the house at night, chanting, moaning, or what sounded like distant thunder even on clear nights. No one could confirm these reports, and most dismissed them as exaggerations or echoes of previous hysteria. The last confirmed sighting of Timothy Caldwell came from a traveling merchant named Byron Nunn, who claimed to have seen the boy standing at the edge of the woods behind his home just after dawn on January 2, 1868. Byron described the boy as wearing no coat. Despite the freezing weather and holding a small leather-bound book in his hands, according to Nunn, Timothy appeared unaware of his presence, gazing skyward with an expression that he described as a mix of awe and terror. When Nunn called out to him, the boy simply turned and walked deeper into the woods. That would be the last time anyone outside the Caldwell family claimed to see him. Over the next several weeks, speculation grew that the Caldwells had sent their son away. Some believed he was taken to an asylum, others that he had died quietly and was buried, in secret to avoid further attention. The family offered no explanations. When questioned directly, Elias Caldwell gave only curt responses, insisting his son was no longer of concern to anyone. Judith Caldwell was never seen in public again after February of that year. Church attendance stopped, the blacksmith shop closed, and by early spring, the Caldwell property appeared abandoned. In April of 1868, the home was found completely empty. Furniture remained, but personal effects were missing, and the room that had once been Timothy's was stripped bare. No forwarding address was left, no relatives informed, and no official record was filed. Local authorities made a brief inquiry, but lacking any evidence of a crime, soon gave up. The family had vanished as quietly as they had lived, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. Decades later, researchers and writers interested in the paranormal began referencing Timothy Caldwell as one of the earliest recorded cases of a child exhibiting unexplained precognitive and linguistic abilities. In the 1920s, an article published in a fringe occult magazine claimed to have traced the Caldwell family to a settlement in western Arkansas, where a man matching Elias's description had reportedly lived under a different name. However, the story offered no proof, and no records corroborated the claim. In the 1950s, a British folklorist cataloging strange American legends visited Grayson County and interviewed surviving residents from the 1860s. While most recalled the boy vaguely or not at all, a few elderly individuals spoke of the quiet. One who saw the other side, he remembered the odd hush that fell over the town during that winter, and how even now, They avoided discussing the matter in detail. Some suggested that Timothy Caldwell's story had been intentionally erased. A few rare newspaper clippings from 1867 mentioning the fasting boy remain, but many others appear to have been lost or never archived. University archives in Kentucky contain fragment spartial letters from physicians referencing an extraordinary specimen or the silent child of Grayson. Whether this was due to deliberate suppression, lack of interest, or simply the fragile nature of 19th century documentation is impossible to determine. The lack of evidence only added to the legend, without an ending, without a grave, without a trace. Timothy became a ghost story woven into the landscape of American folklore. Those who believe in psychic phenomena argue that Timothy represented a human intent assumed, tuned to frequencies beyond normal perception. The fact that his abilities appeared spontaneously and disappeared, just as mysteriously suggested to them that he had been a conduit rather than a source. Others take a more skeptical view, proposing a combination of hysteria, undiagnosed medical conditions, and suggestive memory over time. But even the most rational interpretations struggle to explain the consistency of the predictions. The coherence of the unknown languages, and the sheer lack of deterioration during his 40 days without sustenance. In recent years, amateur historians and paranormal enthusiasts have attempted to piece together the Caldwell mystery. Some have scoured census records, land deeds, and burial registries in an effort to locate any trace of the family post-1868. Others have searched the woods behind the original homestead, now overgrown and part of private farmland, hoping to find the remains of a shack, a diary, or some physical clue. So far, no definitive evidence has emerged. A few artifacts have surfaced: a child's shoe found near the river, a book cover matching the merchant's description, but none have been authenticated or linked conclusively to Timothy Caldwell to this day. The boy remains a mystery that science never solved. His case has become a kind of cipher, studied by those interested in the limits of human potential, consciousness, and the unexplained. Unlike other historical enigmas that eventually gain closure, Timothy's story offers no neat resolution. No clear ending, no body, no testimony, no farewell letter. He simply vanished, as though swallowed by the very forces that once stirred inside him. And perhaps that is what makes his story endure, not the events themselves, but the silence that followed them.